Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to go through 10 different betting strategies to find profitable bets on the NFL. I think it's a really good time to make this video with the NRL season wrapping up this weekend. AFL completed last week, and during the summer here in Australia and during the off season for those sports, NFL is a very good and similar sport if you've been betting on the NRL to continue making money on for a couple of reasons. Firstly, you've got more games on every week. The average NFL week has 16 games with 32 total teams. And the NRL has 8 games each week. The AFL has the 9 games each week. So you have near enough to double the amount of games, but it's also a shorter season. So firstly, more games means more betting opportunities overall, and you don't need to feel as inclined to bet into every game, especially if you're trying to get your turnover up. When there's only 8 games on, you can feel like there's only 2 games on a Sunday this week. I probably need to bet into both of those games, and you don't just have as many options available. But with the NFL, there's so many different games on, and it's a shorter season. There's only the 18 weeks of the regular season in the NFL. That means that every game matters a lot, because one win or one loss can make a significant difference when you get to the end of the year. So each game matters, so motivation levels are up, those kind of things for every game. When you compare that to like the NBA or MLB or NHL even, where they play most days of the week, and the MLB season, every team plays 162 games during the regular season. That means there's a lot of games in there that don't really matter as much, and teams can drop games here and there without it really mattering. But even in the NFL, if you drop a game, it can ultimately mean you miss the playoffs at the end of the season. So that's what we're looking for in games as well. And then probably the biggest and most important thing is, compared to the like AFL a little bit, but especially the NRL compared to the NFL, there's so many more betting markets and options that you can look into. This is really good because instead of just taking like the money line or the handicap or the total and a try score and those kind of things, you can also bet into so many other markets. And when the more markets there is, the more discrepancies you can also find in those markets. When you're shopping around different companies, you can find alternate lines. So for example, in the NRL, if you're looking at try scorer markets and that kind of thing, you can shop around and get the best price for that try score. You can do that same thing for the touchdown scorers in the NFL, but you also have all the different markets. So I'll bring up the sports bet market of the Houston Baltimore game here, which is coming up this week. You have all the normal markets that you would see, your touchdown scorers as well, but then you have all the different props. So you've got passing yards, rushing yards, receiving yards, total receptions, passing touchdowns. There's so many different other avenues that you can go into your bets. And each one of these markets, so if we look at the passing yards, you've got all the alternate lines in there as well. But if we come back over to the all markets, you also have the handicap line as well. So you're not only getting a set line where you can take the over or under, but in the prop markets, you've got the passing yards over or under a certain market. And it is only $1.88 either side. Bookmakers like to have that little bit of extra margin in it. But the point is, you've got options. And then with these markets, so for example, this game, Cooper Rush's line is set at 171.5 passing yards. So you can take over or under that mark. But if you shop around, like just here, we're looking at Sportsbet, but there's all the different betting companies. They'll all offer a line on his passing yards. There's a high likelihood, and with so many games on as well, you'll find alternate numbers on here. So you could get a number below 171 if you want to take the over, or you get a number higher than 171 if you want to take the under. And when you compare all the bookmakers, if you find situations where majority of the companies are all basically at, say, 170, and then you see it bookmaker with 175.5 or 180.5, then you can find big discrepancies. There's commonly 20-30 yards difference, especially in the passing yards. Not so much in this one because this is a lower number, but once you start getting into the mid 200s for these passing yards lines, then you can definitely find some big discrepancies. And those same handicaps are on rushing yards. You can see players rushing yards over, under, and all the alternate lines. It's on receiving yards as well. So Nico Collins' line is set at 72.5. So the point is, you have so many different options you can go into. Plus, obviously, with all the alternate lines, you have the correlation between the passing yards and receiving yards, especially if you think a particular receiver is going to be heavily targeted, then you can definitely use that to your advantage. And so instead of, you can always go through, analyze the games for the main things, look at the history of the matchup, particularly if it's divisional games. That's mostly when you want to do that. But the recent form of teams, the conditions of the games, and how that's going to impact injuries, travel, their upcoming game next week. Do they have a game against a division rival coming up next week? Are they at home in the prime time? Those kind of things. All those things stay the same, but you can also do way more because it's one of the most statistically driven sports. You can get all the numbers on everything you need to know to make your decisions on these matchups and players. And in the NFL, what I really like to do is design the bets that I'm having on a particular game around the expected game script. And that's what I want to talk to you about in this video and go through some strategies for doing that. So we've spoken about all the different options. I'm sure you guys can see there's lots of different ways you can approach betting on these games. And the key thing here is to determine, okay, now how do I know when to take passing yards, when to take rushing, receiving, receptions, those kind of things. That's what I want to talk about here. So firstly, number one, when you have a situation of a really good passing team going against a poor pass defensive side, then you can really look to target the QB and their passing yards, and also the receivers, their total receptions and receiving yards on that team. And it's even better if the team in that situation with a good passing offense is the team that's the underdog in the game, and you're also expecting them to potentially be trailing throughout the match, as then they're going to have the tendency to pass the ball more. In those situations, those passing yards numbers rise dramatically, the receiving numbers go up. And also in this situation, you can also look for the rushing yards and take the unders on that if you're not expecting them to run the ball as much. Oftentimes, teams that are big underdogs, their rushing yards generally stay pretty low. And in games where they get behind early, that's certainly the case. And it's very, very hard for them to catch up from that point. When teams are trailing and you've got your 3 downs trying to get the first down, oftentimes at least 2, if not 3, all 3 plays will be pass attempts. So that's where you can also take player pass attempts as well. So you not only can take the QB passing yards, but you can also go through and look at their pass attempts and pass completions, which are down here as well. So there's so many different options. If you think a team is going to make lots of short passes, and in that situation, you want to more so look at their completions, because you're going to get a higher completion percentage when you're doing lots of short passes. Or if you think they're going to be really trying to air the ball out, make 20, 30, 40 yard completions, then pass attempts is the preferable option. But you can also look into the stats and in the bet finders down how teams go. There's certain teams that give up plenty of completions but limit the number of yards you can make. And then there's other teams that give up big plays, but they don't give up as many completions. So they force you into trying to hit those longer targets. So it's like the really important thing here is there's so many different ways you can break these games down and to determine what bets you can have. And you can always have the stats backing your selections, as opposed to trying to make a decision based on gut feel. And that's why I love with the NFL, like we not only have the money lines, but we can also really go into the props and approach betting on the game. Kind of like in the NBA, instead of taking a team to win or win by a certain amount, you can just find a player who has a really good matchup. They're playing a defense that gives up majority of their points to a certain position, and that player is really suited in this matchup. They might also be having an injury on their side, which takes away one of their other shooters, and everything looks to line up perfectly. So you can do the same thing here in the NFL. Number 2 is when you have a good rushing team, so kind of the opposite of the passing. You have a good rushing team going against a bad rush defense. This situation is more ideal when the team is favorite and expected to win comfortably, because when you're leading, teams go into running the ball more and more rush attempts, more running yards, especially against a bad rush defense. Like when teams are up in the second half, and especially in the fourth quarter, but sometimes even into the third quarter, when they're leading, of those 3 plays, they'll run the ball 2, if not 3 times to try and get that first down. If you get 3 yards, 4 yards, and another 3 yards, you get the first down, and then they'll run the ball again. So this is a really good situation to back the running backs to generate those running yards. This is especially good also in games when there's a bit of rain around or weather like wind that's going to affect the passing game. Also, the other situation where this is good is when you've got a team that isn't the greatest passing offense, or they might have an injury to a quarterback, which I'll get to in a second, or the opposition has a good pass defense and they're forced into running the ball more because that team is one of the best pass defense sides. So it's harder to throw the ball against them. So they rely on the running game a little bit more. When it comes to rushing yards, the one thing you just want to remember is most teams have one dominant running back that'll take the majority of the carries, but there are a few teams that have two, and some of them even use a third running back at points, which can disperse the yards a little bit more. So you always want to review how many carries players are taking for their teams when you're determining which player to back and which player is going to get the majority of snaps, or if it's going to be more of a shared load between the two players. Also, sometimes one player will just be having a really good game, and sometimes they can be the backup. They just go for 2-3 really big runs, and the offense continues to use them a little bit more in that game than they generally would in other matches. Number 3, coming back to the quarterbacks here, sometimes when the QB1 is out of the side, they're using a backup quarterback, teams will run the ball a little bit more often, especially if it is a good pass defense that they're facing. Oftentimes, though, this can be a little bit tricky, so you just want to be cautious around QB injuries, because oftentimes when it's a backup quarterback, that team's more likely to lose the game, which means they're going to be trailing and then they're going to throw the ball more. So it can backfire a little bit more. But the good situation that you want to look for here is when you've got a backup quarterback in, but they're also going up against a good rush defensive side. Because what that means is they're going to try and run the ball a little bit more often early on, but there will be that high inclination to try to pass it because they're probably not going to have success running the ball. So in this situation, you can take the running back and their rushing yards to be low and go under, because they're also going to be that little bit more predictable as well. That defense is going to be expecting the running plays. So that's the way I like to play when there's QB injuries, running backs to go under, because everyone's expecting them to run the ball. Often the bookmakers will set the rushing yards higher as well with this factor in mind. And then when you combine that with the fact that they're most likely trailing in the game, which comes back to the earlier point of how they're going to then need to throw the ball more to play catch up, because no fan likes to watch their team running the ball when they're down on the scoreboard, especially if they're down by more than a touchdown, obviously. Number 4 is taking the quarterback passing yards overs for teams who need to win a particular game. A good example of this happened last week. Kansas City were at home. If they were to lose this game, they go to a 1-3 record. And in this situation, Kansas City hadn't been running the ball well through their previous games or their first 3 games of the season. And in kind of a must-win game against a good opponent, there was no way Kansas City were going to run the ball a lot in this game. And you can see Mahomes' passing yards went through the roof, especially when you combine that with the return of Xavier Worthy into the side. It's set up really well. So you can always play into that motivation factor. Teams are going to go to their strength when it's an important game. You're not going to see like the best passing teams run the ball in situations where they need to win games. So you definitely want to be careful of that. The other thing with passing yards is, so this is number 5, is when you have a good passing matchup, you're expecting a team to throw the ball a lot. That's when you can really look into the receivers. This is also good. Sometimes there's teams that are big favorites, and as I said, when teams are big favorites, they start to run the ball a little bit more in the second half than they normally would. But you should expect them to have success passing the ball. That's what I'm talking about here in this point, is that's where you can really look into receivers, especially when you've got teams where 1 or 2 players, it can be, get a significant share of the target. So you can go through the team stats, look at which receivers are getting the majority of the targets, and then look to target those players. So instead of trying to take the quarterback for 200 plus passing yards, you can take 1 or 2 of those receivers for their receiving yards and combined, or for one of them, you might only need 60 yards receiving or 50 yards receiving. For the other one, 30 yards receiving. And so now it's only 80 or 90 total yards combined as opposed to 200. And effectively, you've got 110 yards to play with for other receivers who aren't getting many targets. Across these two players, they're going to get 70% of the target share. If they pass the ball 20 times, those players are going to be targeted around 15. They're going to get plenty of opportunities. So can also look to do it that way. That's something that I really like doing, which generally pays off really well. The other thing you want to look into as well when it comes to receiving yards is where the opposition is giving up those receiving yards. Are they giving them up to wide receivers? Are they giving them up to the tight end? Or are they giving them up to the running back? Because there's 3 different positions where you can generate those receiving yards. And sometimes teams are very good at limiting wide receivers, but give up heaps of yards to the tight end, or they don't give up much to the tight end, but the running back gets plenty of passes, screen passes out to the side and that kind of thing. I'm going to get to that in one of the later points, but I thought it was important to mention here as well. Number 6 is for touchdown scorers. So for the most part for the NFL, I don't really worry too much about backing touchdown score, because oftentimes it just depends what happens in the red zone as to what kind of plays that they call. This is something that you can really dive into your research with. For example, if you watched the NRL video, you would have seen how I've spoken about where teams look to target. Do they go left? Do they go right? And how that matches up against the opposition. You can do a similar thing in the NFL where you can look at what percentage of plays teams call when they are in the red zone. Do they pass the ball more? Do they run the ball more? And depending how many yards from the end zone they are. But also it can be hard to predict just when they're going to score. Are they going to score from the 20 or are they going to score from the 1 yard line? So if they're at the 1 yard line, they're going to run the ball. If they're at the 20, they're more than likely going to throw it in that situation unless the running back bursts clear. But you can also match this up with how the defensive team or the opposition concede touchdown in the red zone. You can't do too much about the plays from further down the field as opposed to just looking at do they give up more passing or running touchdowns. But pay attention to what plays result in touchdowns, both for the offense and the defense. In the red zone can give you a good guide onto who's going to score the touchdowns. Add to that which players have been scoring lately, but I don't pay too much attention to recent form with touchdown scores. I'm not too worried. Like if a player scored 4 touchdowns in a row, I'm not thinking, oh, they're going to score again in this game or anything like that. Number 7, getting back into the player props for teams that run a high blitz defense. So they like to put a lot of pressure on the quarterback. The offense's running back generally picks up a lot of receptions and rushing yards on the back of that, especially if this is a strength of that team offensively, because teams all look to put a lot of pressure on the quarterback, and then they'll feel that pressure and then look for the pass out to the side to the running back. There's certain teams that are elite at doing this and it works very well for them. And a good defensive coordinator probably won't run the blitz too much against them. Otherwise, they'll make them pay. But you can definitely find situations where an running back is going to be suited and look into their receptions and receiving yards against high blitz defenses, and also when they're a team that is good and taking advantage of that. Some running backs rarely are targeted with passes, but you've obviously got some in the league for teams that get plenty. So those are the ones that you want to look for, because you don't want to take a situation where you've got a team that rarely target the running back, but just because they're going against a high blitz defense, you now back the running back. I don't want to do that. I want them both to match up. I want a high blitz defense and a team where the running back gets plenty of receptions in general. Number 8, we're looking at teams that play a lot of zone coverage, and these are all stats that you can look at online. Against teams that have high zone coverage defense, the tight end often is the player that gets left open more often than not. So they're going to be able to pick up more receptions and receiving yards on the back of that. So this is really good. There's also teams that heavily target their tight ends as well. They get plenty of catches. So when you get those two to pair up, that works really well. The only thing to be a little bit cautious of here is similar to the running back situation is a couple of teams have two really good quality tight ends. There's always one top one, but there is a few teams that have a good backup as well. And if that backup has a good game, then it can take away the amount of snaps that the main tight end can play. So just be cautious of that. But there are teams with that one that they'll get targeted more than wide receivers. And if they're going against a zone coverage defense, then they're going to get plenty of targets in that game. And oftentimes with the tight ends, they'll make most of the catches when they are targeted because they're often short passes, 5-10 yard passes, as opposed to the long passes out to the wide receivers running down the field, or that are really crossing through in 15-20 yard passes where there's a lot more traffic. And then number 9, coming back just to some overall key things as opposed to niche specific things for players, is when we talk about teams are going to throw the ball more when they're trailing and they're going to run the ball more when they're leading, this can lead to skewed stats in their season averages. Some teams will look like they have great passing offense. However, they're a team that's lost the majority of games and they've made all their passing yards trying to chase points in the second halves of games when the defense plays a bit more loose in wanting to not give up a really big play. They're happy to give up a 5 and 10 yard catch to avoid giving up a 50-yard play, and they pick up lots of short completions, short catches in that situation as teams are just trying to get to full time with a lead, because most of the time, most games in the NFL, teams won't really try and put teams to the sword and run up a score against them. If it happens, it just happens. It's not done intentionally. You'll notice a lot of the games that end up in big blowouts are the games where the running back just absolutely dominates. They make 150 plus rushing yards. They're able to burst through for long plays, or there's just been a few really big plays that's added the score up quickly. It's not done technically by intent, because once teams get out to basically a 2-score lead, they go more into a game management mode. The point I want to make here, though, is when teams are either playing from in front a lot or chasing points a lot, then it skews their overall stats. They can look like a very good running team that run the ball a lot, or vice versa. Instead of just looking at their overall averages, you want to look at their EPA rankings for pass and rush, and then overall offense and overall defense. So it's effectively 6 metrics you can look at, see where they rank in the overall league for those numbers, and that'll give you a stronger indication on how good of a rushing team they are, how good of a pass team they are, and the same defensively. And then you can give more weight to those numbers. So pay attention to those throughout the season. It's going to strengthen your players, because sometimes a lot of bettors who just make quick decisions, they see that it's a good passing team and a bad pass defense, miss the fact of how the games have been played, and those numbers don't always equate to. Just because you had the most passing yards doesn't mean you're the best passing offense. And then number 10, just talking about where we're at right now, going into week 5 of the season, so still plenty of time to go. But we've only had 4 weeks of the year, and when you're early in the season, and this applies to every sport, when you're looking at the stats, make sure you pay attention to the opponent that teams have been playing so far. The reason for this is, just for an example, like a team's played 3 games and they've played 3 bad pass defensive sides. Those 3 teams rank in the bottom 5 in the league, and their passing numbers look fantastic. Now they're going against a really good pass defense. They've gone from 3 bottom 5 teams to a top 5 pass defense. It's more than likely they're going to struggle a bit. And then you can look at it on the flip side as well. If they've been going up against 3 bad rush defense sides, they've been running the ball with ease, making plenty of yards, everything looks great. They're looking like one of the best rush teams. And now they're going up against a top 5 rush defense. They're probably going to struggle to run the ball as easily as they have been in the past few weeks, just purely based off of that. And so their running numbers are going to come down, and you want to make sure you're on the right side of that with your bets. Most people just see that they've been putting up huge numbers, expect that it's going to continue. But early in the season, before we have more of a mixture of quality of opponents that they're faced, then you need to make sure that you're factoring that in. I also make sure I compare what teams have been doing on the season, like when we get to the later part of the year, looking at what they've been doing on the season and compare that to how they've been performing in recent games as well, ensuring that I'm keeping track of the quality of opposition. Because in my fixture for the NFL, I keep record of how good the pass defense, how good the rush defense has been of their recent opponents and all season, so we can keep a kind of a trend of that and then match that up with the stats as well. But those are 10 of the things you can do if you want to profit on the NFL. As I said, it's one of the best sports to bet on if you want to make money because of all the options you have. Like at the end of the day, if you're doing the research on NFL, you should be making money. People lose because they think they can just quickly go through, randomly pick the teams that should win, multi up a few teams that should win their games. But that's definitely not the best way to go about it. That's something I did in the very early days. I'd take those teams that should win just because they're the better side. But oftentimes, there's not a huge difference between a lot of the teams. Like you have your top teams, but then there's not that many really bad teams. And those teams can win on any given day if everything goes to plan for them, or the better team just has a little bit of an off day. So you want to be cautious of that. But as always with betting, if you put in the research, you can make the right bets and profit. So I want to do this video to give you an insight into the things that you can do to make sure that you're placing the right bets on the NFL. If you want more help on this, or you want to learn more about betting on the NFL, make sure you like this video so I know that it was helpful. Leave a comment with any questions, and also in the description is the link to the NFL Bet Finders, which is where I keep track of all the stats for these teams and how they've been performing, so you can make this research process really, really easy. And that's where I also post everything I'm betting. So for the NFL, they play Friday mornings, Monday mornings, and Tuesday mornings. Basically every week. There's a few differences. There's a few Sunday games throughout the year, but all those plays will be posted the day before those games. So if you want to follow for the Monday games, make sure you're in there Sunday afternoon when all the plays are posted. Thanks guys for watching. Hope you're having a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.